tester room panels.
Cool. And there's another mic over there for you guys to share over there, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Ashok. I'm the CEO of Integral. We're a computer engineering company that consults to autos, especially in the transportation and mobility space. We started August of last year, and in kind of growing the company, there's about 13 of us now. There's a few things that we've learned. One of them is that there's a huge amount of validation in starting this company, and that there's a lot of code that the industry needs written, especially here in Detroit, in the auto industry. Just like any other company, hiring is hard, especially when you're pretty deliberate about the type of team you want to grow. Furthermore to that, hiring's hard when you want a good amount of diversity and inclusivity in your team, so that your team represents what, when you walk outside of the office, the rest of your city where you live and create looks like, right? And some of the other things we realize are that there's a pretty high barrier to entry in terms of getting into the technology space. At least that's what the conventional wisdom says, in terms of having to go out there, pay tens of thousands of dollars a year to get an undergrad degree before you can write code. And we know for a fact that a lot of the best engineers we've worked with came into that profession through many different paths, and not necessarily paying those tens of thousands of dollars. So we thought we'd kind of talk about that a little bit more through this panel. With that, I'm going to introduce my panel. Here we have Aimme, who is from Cengage Learning. Aimme is a manager at Cengage Learning and leads a product line, as well as mentors 10 engineers. We have George, who is from ShiftUp and also a senior engineer at North American Bank Card. George is a self-taught engineer and recently moved back from Chicago to Detroit. We have Jennifer, who is an engineer at Expedia. Jennifer went to a local boot camp. And before that, she was a Spanish teacher. So really interested to hear more about that. And then we have Gavin, who is the CEO of Autonomic. Autonomic just recently got acquired by Ford. Congratulations. So we'll be seeing more of Gavin from San Francisco. Thanks a lot for coming all the way, and thanks to all of you. So we'll be seeing more of Gavin now in Detroit. So I'll kind of get started with the first one. First question that's a little bit of a warm-up for everyone. And you've all come into computer engineering or software from many different paths, and maybe talk about that trigger from what you were doing before, that moment that kind of brought you to this new path. And I'll start with you, Aimme.
All right. Sure. It's great to see such a large group tonight first. Thank you all for coming. How I got into software industry was by a marketing degree. So I'm a marketing, my degree from college is marketing. I thought I was going to be in market research. Thought I was going to live in Chicago and tell you why you all like the Goldbergs or some other TV show that you like. But that didn't happen. My fiance, who's now my husband at the time, had no desire in moving to Chicago or New York or any place where we couldn't have a car. He's a big car guy. And so I started looking at other places that I could get a kind of market research job, and I ended up here at EDS. I was there. I worked in a team that was trying to figure out how we could sell all the products that they had built for GM to other people. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to have a great manager who said, "You have potential, but I don't know if you know this or not, but EDS is a technology company." And one of the things that they really value here are people who have technical skills and then are able to go into other areas of the company. So she recommended that I go to their software engineering program and do that. So I went there, ended up there, found out I was pretty good, I'm gonna say good, maybe okay at it, and started my software career from there.
So you were a software engineer at one point?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just have a question, if we can have a show of hands. How many people here are actually experienced developers? How many people have no clue how to read code? I have no clue how to read code.
Oh.
You're in the middle? Okay. Cool. So my journey actually started through a cease and desist letter that I received from Groupon when I was 16 years old. Basically what happened was I was really big into business. I've always been into business. And I remember Groupon was just getting started, and they were going to be headquartered in Detroit, so we thought. But they actually they chose Chicago for whatever reason. And I remember my buddy was telling me, I had some pretty nerdy friends in high school, but my buddy was telling me, hey, I just made like $1,000 by doing something called a forum. And I'm like, okay, well, what's a forum? So I started looking into forums, and I came across this software called vBulletin, which is kind of like an out-of-the-box solution of forums. So I set up one, and then I just went to town like hacking away at Groupon.com, like taking like their colors and their logo and like making it my own, but just adding the word forums after it. So after a while I did that, and I had just a lot of bots like sign up to like my website. So I thought I had like real generic, like inorganic user activity, but it was actually like thousands of bots. But I was generating like revenue from like Google AdSense. And so, I was riding my high horse for a little bit, and then my dad gave me a letter, and I opened it up, and it was like a cease and desist letter, and I was like, this is cool. And at that point, I was pretty much hooked. I just started dissecting the vBulletin software and just, learned how to customize it, and it led me to a business degree, or not a business degree, actually to business school, and then I decided, what's the point in majoring in entrepreneurship? I'm gonna go start my own business. And my first clients were actually my professors. And I did that for a few years, and then I got into enterprise software development, and that's where I'm at right now.
Oh, right, I have my own.
Is it safe to turn this off? Sure.
So I was a former teacher. I taught Spanish for 5 years, some combination of 3rd grade through 8th grade. And I think the moment that I realized that I wanted to transition to something else was the winter of that 5th year teaching, and I realized that it just wasn't a fit for my personality. So I'm very introverted, and I was putting on a song and dance every day, a literal song and dance, singing and dancing. And I, over the course of that year, had been building a website for our classroom, and I found myself working till like 1 in the morning on this website. And finally I realized, after applying to a few different jobs and getting rejections, that there was so much vibrant, cool stuff happening in the tech community. So started looking into transitions. My brother is also a software developer and was always jealous of the kinds of projects he got to work on. So ended up finding Grand Circus, and it was really low stakes. I had the summer off. So I thought, why not give it a try? I loved it and was pretty good at it, and ended up getting a position as a software consultant after that, and haven't looked back since. I love it.
Now again in Spanish. Maybe with some interpretive dance. I guess my background is a little different. I wanted to work in construction when I was growing up. My parents were so disappointed in me. They wanted me to be an accountant, equally dull from my point of view. And my mother was an accountant, or is an accountant. And during one summer, I was at her place of work, and I saw an old computer. I didn't really know much about it. I guess I was like 11 or 12 years old, but I was bored. So I started playing with it. It kind of mostly worked. And I would just bug people around the place of work to help me understand how to make it work. And there was a manual for a thing called GW Basic, which is a form of like a kind of programming language. This is going back like 20, this is like, oh shit. This is like 30 years now. And time flies, right? And I kind of, yeah, right? I almost. And I sort of taught myself how to write code in a very primitive sense, like basic arithmetic and so on. Any of you who know basic will understand. This was quite frustrating, and I heard about a thing called C, similar to George, I learned how to appropriate other people's intellectual property pretty quickly. There wasn't a thing called the internet, so for merely academic purposes, I acquired a copy of Ball and C, but didn't know how to code C, and so I acquired a book on C programming, kind of taught myself how to code C about 13 years of age. The whole reason I did this was it was actually what I'd been looking for all along. It was construction. It's just that it didn't physically exhaust me. It mentally exhausted me. And I lived in kind of a cold climate. I'm Australian. I lived in Melbourne. It rained all the time, so I sat inside and wrote code all winter, much to the chagrin of my parents, who thought I should be playing football or something like that. So I did that, and it turned out pretty well.
And actually, Gavin, the next question I have is for you. I understand that you're a leading contributor to Postgres, an open source project. We're a pretty well-used database.
Right.
And open source was a big part of that journey for you.
Sure was.
Like from there. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into open source, what it's like to be in the open source community, and maybe advice for folks over here who maybe haven't tinkered around with that yet in terms of how to get started?
So, in that original computer, it was just DOS, right? And then there was Windows, and it sucked, right? It still does. So I discovered that there was a thing called Unix. That seemed really cool because it just looked impressive. It wasn't clear what to do, and there was so much to learn. So I was teaching myself that, and then I heard about Linux. So I got a copy of the Linux source code. This is like 93, 94. I lined up at a bookstore, remember those, and bought on floppy drives the Linux source code as distributed by Walnut Creek Software Distributions. This is in Australia, so it came on a boat. Again, no internet, right? So at least not for me. I acquired it. It was fascinating. I had no idea how to do anything with it. And then I went and got like a part-time job at a very early internet service provider. And they sort of showed me the ropes. Then I started to understand the source code, like to run an ISP at that time, you had to go and hack on the Linux kernel and stuff like that to make modems and stuff work. And so they exposed me to this whole world and whole area of open source. And the interesting thing was that whereas in my life offline, I was a kid, kind of pudgy, wasn't taken seriously. Online, I could be anything I wanted. Actually, I've never actually told anyone. I called myself SWM, which was Sexy Wheelchair Man. Also, I've literally I haven't even told my wife that's what it stands for. So she's not here. So the mystery that is SWM will remain. But I could be anyone I wanted. So I adopted this kind of persona. And people treated me like an adult, like someone who had a valuable opinion. I got really, really interested in database software I just don't even understand why. I had a paper round, I bought Microsoft Access with money that I earned trudging around in the rain. It's the weirdest thing. So I really like database software, discovered MySQL, didn't like it. This is at an aesthetic level, not from a usability point of view, just the way the software was implemented. Found Postgres, as Ashok said, fell in love. It's just really elegantly written software. And essentially learned how to actually code from reading that and interacting with the people who built that. They all had impressive degrees from places I'd never heard of. I know them now, Carnegie Mellon and Cornell, places like that. Again, I was in Australia with my dial-up modem, stealing internet access, all that kind of good stuff. But I was treated like a member of this community and as an equal. I did that through the 90s, into the 2000s, formed a company around it, sold that company, not in a good sense, is what I'd say. I established the company a month before the NASDAQ crashed in 2000. Interesting lessons around business. You always learn them the hard way. Did that for a while. But open source is always something that I've come back to, and as we know now, it's like a real phenomenon. At the time it was mailing lists. I actually don't really know what the best way to interact around software in the community is, probably GitHub. But it absolutely changed my life. It was like, I didn't know there was a fork in the road. It turns out I took one path. That path was open source, and the rest is history or whatever.
What was it like the first time you made a contribution?
I got laughed at fairly badly. There is a Linus Torvalds of Postgres by the name of Tom Lane. And this is not what he said about my contribution, but when I was working at a company, I was mentoring some people. He unfortunately said, I remember it was like the 12th of December, and he said, "That's the stupidest idea I've heard all year." I think it was kind of the same. But I don't want to give you the wrong impression that somehow this community and open source in general is not inclusive. It's just that ideas are so important, and ideas live or die by their merit there, rather than like backgrounds, academic degrees, credentials of some description. They seem to matter less, or mattered a lot less when I got into it.
And I think, when we talked about this before, the key part was that there's a sense of vulnerability to put yourself out there. You probably saw other people get laughed at before you kind of took your own reins and got laughed at. And it's something interesting that was a trend for everyone here. And I can think of in my career, those few moments where I kind of realized, it's easier for me to stop, be humble, ask for help, and then and be comfortable with not knowing everything and knowing that you may get laughed at. So maybe we can hear from the rest of you about kind of those moments you had when you were learning how to code, when you had to kind of put yourself out there or admit that you didn't know everything. Start with Jen, maybe.
Sure. So I think that's really a big part of not only the beginning of a career, but always. I think one of the best things that I could do that was really hard to convince myself that I needed to do was admit the things I didn't know, especially coming to the career from a non-traditional path, not with a computer science degree. There were definitely moments where I felt like I needed to prove myself and kind of go along with things and pretend like I knew what everyone was talking about. And I think that that can be a good strategy sometimes, but what really helped me move forward and grow was asking the dumb questions. Even when everyone's sitting around nodding their head like, I know what this acronym means, there's probably someone else who doesn't. And I think really productive conversations come out of that. I think admitting and exposing your ignorance is a really helpful strategy. Something I'm still using that I'll always use. And I think a lot of times it's hard to step away from that pride and do that, but it's so helpful in the end of the day.
Mic check, okay. I think for me there was a number of things. So from a business perspective, it made sense to admit that I didn't know, because you don't want to look stupid in front of your clients, when you're running your own consultancy or your own software engineering firm. From a developer perspective, it was a little bit different when I was hands-on and had my sleeves rolled up and I was working on this code, because there's two kinds of people. So there's one kind of person, you put them under tremendous pressure and they crumble, and there's another kind of person, they form a diamond. So it really depends on your personality. And just being a minority in technology, I felt like I had something to prove. I felt like I was already told no, out of the womb, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. So for me, it was really an opportunity to prove myself right and to prove the world wrong. And I wasn't cynical, I didn't take it out on my clients or anything like that, but I was very, very aware that the finish line was maybe just another step away. And that's how it felt, throughout the entire time. When you're developing, when you're learning things, it's a lot like driving at night. You don't know what's a mile ahead. You only know the next 15 feet. And you have your headlights shining. You're going along the curve, and sure enough, every 15 feet will eventually get you to the mile that you were aiming to get to. So yeah, I think from a developer perspective, pressure was a good thing. but you really have to know yourself. If you know that you're the kind of person that kind of crumbles under pressure, or you're a little bit insecure, or that you have a difficult time understanding or grasping something, then you need to have a little bit more humility and ask for help at that point. But from a business perspective, don't be foolish, don't embarrass yourself. Admit when you don't know something, and your clients will, you'll find that generally they're understanding. They understand that not everyone has every solution. And fortunately for me, it worked out to where I told my clients, I didn't know this or I didn't know that, and they were very patient. They said, hey, we'll give you time. So we were able to take deadlines that were a month and triple them, 3 months, and they were still writing checks because they had trusted me at that point because I was very open with them. And I think that's something that also applies not only to software development but to life as well, is to have some humility and develop some leadership skills. But understand yourself. Are you going to crumble, or are you going to turn into a diamond when this is all said and done?
Sure. I don't know if I can pass up the advice that you've gotten from Jen and George, though. It's been great. But, my experience more matches Jen. It's ask for help, right? I walked in the software engineering class knowing nothing, right? Like, how do you compile this? What is this? Even though they had it written right in a book, I didn't know anything to do how to do it. So I was constantly asking questions. The person who sat next to me on either side was in trouble because I was behind and always asking things. And EDS at the time, it was like they locked you in like a set of condominiums for like 3 months, and it was like, have fun, figure this out. And it was very scary, but similar to how George described it, I wrote my first method. It was like, yes, it compiled, it ran, it did what it was supposed to do, and just keep on thinking, well, if I did that, I bet I can do the next thing. But this journey has never been alone. I've always gathered someone who may not have wanted to come with me, but grabbed their hand and been like, you're going to help me, and we're going to figure this out. But I always try to bring something to the relationship, too, so that, there's something that's different. I'm outgoing. Some people aren't. So I can introduce people to a lot of people. I'm organized, so I can help there. I'm committed. And there's hardly a situation that will baffle me or get me down. So that's helpful too. So, making sure that I have something to bring to the situation, but asking for help and knowing that I don't know everything has been a huge win. And, even when developers at one time were coding in cubes, I never coded in my cube. I always coded in my neighbor's cube. Half the time, because I liked the communication. I wanted to see if what I was doing was right, and I liked creating that community around me.
Something else I actually wanted to add as well that's been really helpful is communicating or advocating for your learning style and when you're asking for help. A lot of what I've noticed over this last year and a half, when I ask for help, someone wants to they're very willing to help, but a lot of times it's just quickly going through steps out loud. And for me, that goes right over my head, especially if there's anything in there that is remotely foreign to me. So something that I usually do is ask somebody to either draw it out or to show me, to physically walk me through the steps, or like Amy was saying, just sit down with somebody to make sure you're doing it the right way. So I think it's really important to know how you learn and let that guide how you ask for help.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think in the same vein, I went to university to get an engineering degree, and in none of my classes did any of my professors say that I would do better if I had humility and asked for help, right? It never happened. I got ripped off a little bit. In the same vein, I think all of you have a story about kind of not just did you have the humility to kind of ask for help. In addition, you also have your stories about how you were able to, in different stages, set yourself apart from kind of the competition, whether you were kind of working as a contractor at a bank or at a boot camp trying to find your first job in a new role. I want to hear a little bit more about that in terms of what you combined that humility with to sort of really get to the next level. That you stayed late and helped someone one time.
Yeah, I did. So back to my days of engineering, I'll constantly stay late and help someone. Let me say, it just didn't happen once. But the first time that I did it, I have no programming skills. I mean, I have some, right? But it's getting late, and we have these like assignments that are due all the time. And nobody had yet pulled an all-nighter, but my group needed an all-nighter. And the best coder volunteered to stay and pull the all-nighter, and I volunteered to stay with him. And I helped things, and I looked at things, and I wasn't the coder that needed to be with him and stayed with him, but what it showed was that I was committed, and it made everybody look at me beginning the next day to do it that way. So, showing that you're committed, showing that you're not there just to take, but you're there to give, and you're there to give whatever you can, can really do a lot on a team and have people start willing to put effort into you and to see what can be different.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I think there are times that, in speaking with all of you before, there are times that, you could remember those times that, in your case, you brought that pressure on yourself because you knew that you could handle it. And there were times that you were able to separate yourself apart from folks who had sort of similar credentials as you did, or folks who were on the same team from when you went from a junior developer to a senior developer. So I wanted to kind of understand what we did to combine that humility with that perseverance or hard work or tenacity, and maybe an anecdote.
Yeah, I think for me it was admitting that a lot of times I was ignorant towards what was going on out there. I have a natural curiosity to learn, and let's be honest, in technology you'll never know everything, right? So therefore, by default, we're all ignorant in a sense. So my curiosity, this is actually my first, this is back when I had my first W-2 full-time employment after I just closed down with my first consultancy company. I was working for the Michigan Credit Union League as a software engineer, and they did things a little bit differently. It's a great company to work for though. But I had noticed that in these open source projects and in these other things that were happening, they were using things like frameworks, and I'm like, what's a framework? We're not using a framework. Or what's this tool? What's that tool? What's this tool? So I just started digging around on GitHub and just looking at things, and there was a lot that I didn't know. Like, you don't know what you don't know, and so I told myself that in order for me to grow, I needed to be comfortable outgrowing my own employer. And I'll never forget when I was in college, the chairman of entrepreneurship told me that it's a lot like mentors, right? So or friends. They're in your life when you need them, and then sometimes you do outgrow them, but that's okay. That it just means you're on to the next thing, and then you're gonna meet another mentor. You may outgrow that mentor, and just understanding that. So I knew where I wanted to be, and I knew that where I wasn't getting me there. If anything, it were a crutch. If I were to shop out my resume at different cities, on the West Coast or Midwest, and there was holes in it, because my employer at the time, they weren't using bleeding edge technologies, they weren't using the latest and greatest, but the open source community was, and a lot of companies were. So that meant for me, I needed to be in my workhorse after my 9 to 5. I had to put in the hours, I had to be up till 3 o'clock. I remember sometimes on weekends I was up 36 hours straight. And I did that, and I guess the biggest struggle that I faced, that you may face when you do all this, is validating your knowledge. So you're putting in all these crazy hours, but who cares? It's not seeing the real world. It's not on a production server. But there's these nifty things called certifications, and for me it was get my Zen certification. If I'm going to be the best of the best at PHP, at JavaScript, at Cisco security, whatever it is, it's a $250 investment, and it takes a half hour to do, or an hour for the test. A half hour if you really know what you're doing. But yeah, just not being oblivious, and just know that there's some ignorance. This is the industry that we work in. Every single day there's a new tool that comes out. I guarantee you right now, someone just merged something on GitHub that's a brand new tool, and I'll probably crack it open in a week, and it'll probably solve a problem that I had. And that's just the industry that we work in. That's the nature. So just understanding that, you don't know everything, and you need to be curious. You need to get after it, because if you don't, who knows? I mean, the 4 of us are up here, but we may not have a job in 5 to 10 years. because the nature of technology right now is so crazy, you know, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we need to learn that. We can't be comfortable. So, you know, that's very important, is continue your education outside of your employer. You know, this whole facade of security, that's what it is. It's a facade. It's not something that's guaranteed. You know, we see it all the time. Companies are laying off. Snap just laid off 100 people. Meanwhile, their stock is growing. Why? Because they're replacing people. They're cannibalizing people. They're eating their own dog food. That's what we call it in the IT industry. When you develop something, you use that thing that you developed to develop something else. You're eating your own dog food. And that's what's happening. And I feel like if you guys just, just be curious. Just have a natural curiosity. And if it doesn't interest you, to move on to something that does interest you and be more curious about that thing. Because this is just an industry where you just can't stay stagnant. And then just understand that, you know, breakups are hard. Sometimes you'll have to break up with your employer. You know, you break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend. It's the same thing. You outgrow people. And if you're comfortable, that's not a good thing. It's really not a good thing. If you're sitting at your job and you've been there for 4, 5, 10, 15 years, and you're developing and maintaining the exact same system with no new skill sets, and you're comfortable, and you can't wait to get out and it's 4:30 on a Friday, and you're not staying until 6:30 working some more, waiting for traffic to die down, you're in the wrong industry. You're working for the wrong employer. You're working on the wrong product. So, I mean, if there were anything, you know, you would take away from this, is be curious, understand you don't know everything, and job security is not promised in this industry.
So the feeling like I needed to set myself apart was very real when I went through the boot camp, because you're put in with 30, 40 other people who are all ending at the same time, vying for similar jobs. And I'm competitive by nature, so that really put the drive in me. And I knew several months before I registered for the boot camp that it was something that I wanted to do. So I felt like something that worked really well for me was doing my homework. I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew that I wasn't going to magically show up and do a boot camp and become a developer without the work. So I chose a language, JavaScript, and I started doing code katas, all the free things that you could do on the internet. I'm an expert, I know them all. I did all of them, and there was a moment I remember my students were taking a test, and I was literally sitting there like trying to finish an algorithm and thinking like, this is ridiculous, I can't be doing this right now. So I did a lot of homework before I started the boot camp. And that's something I was really grateful for, because I think one of the things the boot camp did really well was put together a curriculum where I could build an app, but it didn't focus so much on the fundamentals of any particular language. So that really gave me a step up there. In terms of setting myself apart after, networking and attending community events was key. I mean, I really dedicated my time, and it was tough. I'm introverted, so the idea of going twice a week to an event where there are 30, 40 people you don't know is kind of terrifying. But that's where I got my job. I sent out probably hundreds of resumes before I got my first job and didn't hear back from one person. But it was when I actually connected with people in real life and explained my story and my background and where I was coming from and what I was interested in, I could really show that I was passionate about something, is where things moved forward. So it was reaching out to the community, and I remember when I was building my final app for the boot camp, I was stuck, and I put out a call on the Girl Develop It Slack channel, and literally 5 people offered their weekend time to sit down and help me. So I think reaching out and trying to find a mentor and connecting with people who want to help you, and there are a lot. So it was homework and getting involved in the community.
You got anything to add, Gavin?
Sure. So I needed a job when I was a teenager, and so I chose the highest paying job that I could find, which was at a bank. And it was an administrative position. I don't mean like a systems administrator. I mean like clerical work. But it paid like a really large amount of money, like $20, $25 at the time, and I was a student. This was like an incredible amount of money. I was doing like a paper run for like $3 an hour. So to get, it was like $20, $25 an hour was kind of amazing. I didn't sort of know what a corporate job was. I didn't realize that I wasn't meant to do very much work. And so I had a lot of time on my hands because I got my work done relatively quickly. And there were it was on a trading floor in a bank, and there were two kinds of people on this floor. There were traders who are assholes. And then there were IT people who I thought were the coolest people in the world. The thing is that the IT people, actually the traders as well, but the IT people were really lazy, and but I was really interested, and they were obviously manipulating me to do their jobs for them. I thought I was being cool, but I was like 18, so. Anyway, I wanted to kind of always impress them, so I just kept on studying in the evening, and they would say, hey, we have to set up like an LDAP server tomorrow. I remember this moment very distinctly. So I went and read the open LDAP source code, thinking that like that's how you set up an LDAP server. And like, imagine my confusion the next day when people are pointing and clicking around a screen, and I'm describing to them how the LDAP protocol works. I just didn't know that you weren't meant to work like that. So I kept on doing that throughout my career, and I guess it kind of set me apart. Maybe I'm just like into pandering or something like that, but I just really wanted to impress people for whatever reason, and I guess it kind of set me apart, and software was like the easiest way to essentially do it.
Awesome. So the next question's kind of going back to inclusion and diversity. The two of you have very successful careers being females in software in Detroit. So maybe tell us a little bit about what that was like for you. And, speaking of assholes, how's my Australian accent? Speaking of jerks, what are some things that, are your pet peeves that folks probably don't even realize they're doing that make it harder make it harder as a female in working in kind of a technology or a group rather that's more male dominated?
I was thinking about this question because I've been lucky. I haven't worked with a whole lot of assholes, so I've been very, very lucky and grateful for that. But I will admit that 9 out of 10 times I've been a job traveler. I don't want to say a jumper, but I've kind of like outgrown people and had to move on to different things. So I typically will often find myself the only woman on the team. And the things that I think about when working there, sometimes while I try to be as open-minded and as willing to participate in as everything as possible, there are times when things cross the line and make me uncomfortable. But I know to use my words, like I tell my daughter, use your words, and say, hey, that kind of crossed it, and when you're open and you're honest and I'm kind of like an open book. They know when I say something that I mean it, that I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. So that's one thing that I learned really quickly was to stick up for myself. The other time was to go to things sometimes even when I didn't want to go. Just because it's building a sense of community and doing that, as well as picking things and inviting them to things that I wanted to do, and see if they would go do that as well. But because I've always asked for help, and I always expect that everybody's going to want to help me. I always was able to build relationships with all the guys that I work with one-on-one. And so we usually had all very good relationships and understanding. I remember, this is me being critical. I remember early on in my technical career, I was kind of like George, like the workhorse. I still like to work a lot. But I would come in early and I would stay late, and I'd be like, man, look at those people coming in and leaving. And I can't believe that. And, forgetting that people had kids, right? And now I have kids. And guess what? Kids get sick. Kids have school activities. Kids have things like that. And I have to leave. But the best thing about the work environment right now that I see that has changed over the 20 years that I've been in it is that everybody has that responsibility now. It's not just a female responsibility. Guys are leaving too to go to conferences or soccer or things like that, which has made it really more open. And I think events like these community events where we get out and we get to know each other, and as well as participating, like Gavin was saying, when they don't know you and they don't know who you are and you're participating and they have no clue what your title is or what your role is, that helps as well. So I'd love to tell you that it's been extremely challenging, but I'm grateful for the guys who I haven't been around, and I'm very supportive and always willing to help women that are not in as good of situations, and making sure that they hear that there are good places to work, that it's not always like that there are people who understand, and there are people that want to help you grow, and it's not just a boys club, that it's an all-inclusive club.
I also have had a really positive experience and have felt really lucky that I've worked at a couple places that have had really open, candid conversations about diversity and inclusion, and have not just talked the talk, but also walked the walk. So if I were going to give any one piece of advice of looking for a position, or if you're not happy where you are, there are a lot of companies that are doing really awesome things and having really great conversations, and which has positively impacted their culture. As far as pet peeves, I'd have to agree with the kind of boys club conversations. I think every team I've been on, I've been the only female. And I think sometimes it's easy to forget that there is a female on the teams, and not just in terms of conversations that cross the line, but I think also in terms of the content, being inclusive and asking questions about, I think there's a lot of assumptions about a kind of like nerdy, geeky gaming culture, or there are a lot of stereotypes and conversations that generally hold true. So I think the idea that you might not fit in that box and you have other interests and you do other things is sometimes lost. So I think having an open mind outside of the overarching diversity and inclusion of like the small day-to-day conversations that can happen.
If I can add just one thing, and I just read this book last year because I was positive I didn't need it, but I read Lean In. And if you haven't read Lean In, I would suggest, for a female to read it, because it does, there's a lot of good advice. One of my favorite pieces in there is to have your seat at the table. I'm the first one in a meeting room to sit on the edge because I want everybody else to have a seat and have a good time, and I look at it as me being helpful, but not realizing at time, that I'm putting myself in the back. So there was a lot of good advice there, so I'd recommend reading that.
Awesome, thank you. And George, I got a question for you about you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what's it like kind of here in Detroit, you were out in Chicago for a bit, being a black developer? And what's the advice that you have?
What up, though? No, it's weird. It's weird. Just being a kid from like the east side Detroit, and then here I am in corporate America. Right, so it's just weird. I remember when I first started like doing all this, and I was starting my consultancy. I had, the whole notion of fake it till you make it. I took it to the extreme. I was like, greetings and salutations. And people are just like, well, hey, what's up? Like white people like, hey, what's up? And and he's really white to be a black guy. So it took me a while to really be comfortable in my own skin. It wasn't until I actually started being more interested in the black culture and the history, and actually what really got me interested were the race riots, 1960 Detroit race riots and things like that. I started looking into well, where does this stem from, and started reading more books about African American culture. And I became proud of who I was, you know. So it was almost like when I was in corporate America, you know, I was institutionalized and I had lost who I was, a sense of who I was. You know, you lose a little bit of streetness or whatever else. You know, you wear tighter clothes or whatever. But you really don't feel like, you know, you're yourself. You have really no self. I mean, you're in this place for 9 hours a day sometimes, and you know, and a lot of times I'm the only black guy in the room, and so it's a culture shock. But at the same time, it's always fun to see like employers embrace that. I'll never forget, my previous job was actually working for a hosting company based out of Chicago, and yeah, day one, like the interview was like, you know, really cool guy, you know, he's wearing shorts, you know, he's talking to me and everything, and you show him in the office, and this guy just flies by on a hoverboard, just, I'm like, oh my God, they have hoverboards here, this is so sweet. You know, and then an Asian guy flies by on a hoverboard, I'm like, an Asian guy on a hoverboard, this is so sweet, I've never seen this before. You know, so there's diversity everywhere. And then the CEO walks up to me, and you know, it's a fairly small company, it's kind of cool that the CEO can just walk up to you, he's just like, what's up, man? And I'm like, do I say greetings and salutations, or do I say what's up? You know, so I was like, what up, though? You know, from Detroit, that's what we say, what up, though? But yeah, I mean, if you're not comfortable with who you are in the workplace, then it may be time to find a new employer. You know, you shouldn't have to fake it till you make it in that sense. It's one thing to put yourself in a pressure cooker. It's another thing to completely change who you are. Because if you start changing who you are in the workplace, it correlates into other things. It correlates into your personal life and, you know, things like that. So be genuine, be authentic, be yourself. You know, there's been a couple times I'm cussing an employer out, and people just look at me. That's you know, a little bit more rough around the edges. I'm from Detroit, you know, so it is what it is. But no, don't go cussing your coworkers out. Not good for HR. But yeah, you know, for me, it kind of worked out. It took a while before I actually could warm up to who I was and actually come out, you know. And there's a couple of students in here, you know, I help run a learning cohort, and I'm sure there's times they've seen me dressed like I am today, and there's times they see me wear Jordans with holes in the jeans and stuff like that. I don't have holes in my Jordans. Way too fresh for that. But yeah, you know, just be yourself, and you'll be all right.
Thanks. And so I'm going to start with Gavin on the next one, but I kind of want to hear from all of you about where has not having a CS degree kind of held you back in your software career ever?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ashok. So yeah, I don't have a CS degree. I studied poetry because women. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to live in, I think, 6 countries. And so it always comes up when you're immigrating into another country, especially if you're going to go and work as an engineer or something like that. They want to see your degree. Turns out when you sell your company as well, they want to see your degree. And then they start scratching their head about why the VP of engineering doesn't have a CS degree. Yeah, it's occasionally held me back. Now, at the same time, I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm a white man, so I get away with more things than others. And so I was in a position in many occasions to just say, well, either work with me or don't. And sometimes people didn't, and usually they did. I got kind of smart about it, which is I went to NYU. I went to a professor there and I asked them to write a document certifying that I had enough experience because of my contributions in open source that they would give me a degree if I asked for it. And then I started just handing that out to people, and that turned out to be enough, at least for me.
What did that cost you?
Nothing in money.
This is a hard question to answer. I honestly don't know. I've never been directly confronted with the question, where's your CS degree? Speculating, maybe in my first job search. I don't know, because it's only my experience. I don't know if I were a recent grad from a university with a computer science degree, if it would have been any different. maybe. But in my time over these last couple of years, there's never been one point where I felt like I needed to defend myself, like, oh, I don't know this because I don't have a computer science degree. That's never been the case. There's never been anybody that's questioned it. It's never come up at an interview. So I honestly can't say that it directly I've ever encountered any barriers, at least not yet, probably not ever. Yeah.
I've had the opposite experience. So I think for me, starting out, actually I know for me starting out, no one would even consider it. You know, not having a computer science degree and you're trying to apply for a job where you're making $70,000, $80,000 out of the gate. It just wasn't an option. So I had no other choice but to make it work, and that's why I decided, you know what, I'm going to start my own company because I am 100% responsible for my failure or for my success. So I chose that route. And then after that, after getting some experience under my belt, you know, this kind of goes back to certifications. I remember one day I was, my parents live in Kansas, so I'm just meeting my dad in Kansas City, and we were at Outback, and I was with my stepbrother. You know, I told him, like, yeah, I'm leaving school. And, you know, my dad's devastated, you know, being an African-American, and he doesn't want me to be a statistic. So he's a little worried about me or whatever else, and we're just talking, and I was like, well, I have this theory about Harvard students. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, what's that? And I'm like, they're robots. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, you know, like, from third grade until their senior year, they've gotten straight A's because they've done everything everyone's told them to do. Like, there's no rebellion in that. Which is true to an extent. I'm fairly positive that if you're a Harvard grad, you're an intelligent person. But again, there's two kinds of people in this world. You know, there's someone that's going to make it work, and there's someone that's actually, you know, they've acquired some type of accreditation that's made it work on their behalf. You know, I was in the latter group of people. So after, you know, I told my dad that I was going to do this, he kind of chuckled and laughed, and, you know, he was worried. So, you know, I came back to Michigan and I did my thing. But again, what really worked out for me was the certification, because I didn't have a degree, but that's okay because I was in the now. So, and it's an interesting question because I still talk to a couple professors and some students that are CS students, and I think the company I work for, the advisory board, there's actually some computer science students, and there's a coach, a mentor who's a student, a computer science student. And I was asking him at dinner one day, don't you ever feel like by the time you leave college, the industry is going to be so far ahead of you that your degree won't be valid? He said, absolutely, 100% agree with it. And I asked him, well, why are you getting a degree? And he told me that he was getting a degree because he had already started in that path and that he wanted to understand the fundamentals of how things worked. He chose that degree because that degree could teach him how to learn. So he was learning how to learn. He wasn't learning how to code. He wasn't learning about, you know, electromagnetic fields and things like that just so he can go and apply those. He wanted to challenge himself and teach himself how to learn. But there's a lot of people that can't afford that. And this circles right back around to certifications. You know, a degree is a very good measure of validating that this person has been through the fire. You know, they've paid whatever debts that they had to pay, and they have their degree. And there's certifications, and there's two different things. You know, while you may acquire social skills from a degree and, you know, networking and, you know, whatever you get for being an alumni of a educational institution, but a certification validates one thing, and that's knowledge and that competency. Whatever you're getting certified in, that is validated knowledge that you scored, you know, whatever percentage it was in order to walk away with that certification. Who can refute that? Employers definitely can't refute that. Because after I got my certification, I promise you, LinkedIn recruiters are just all over me. And they still are. I'm pretty sure half the engineers in this room could fire up LinkedIn right now and have some bot or some random guy trying to offer them a job. And if you have a certification, it's easy. I mean, it rains job offers. And it just takes just one. You know, become proficient in one skill set. There's a million out there. The industry is crazy. You know, like every day there's something new. There's a different subset. Just pick one thing and master it. And you can dabble into other things, but pick one thing, master it, get your 6-figure income, whatever it is you want to do, and, live frugally, set aside some money and do what you need to do, but you don't need to go to school for 4 to 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, get a master's in computer science to make a website. I mean, that's just ridiculous. If I wanted to make a website, I'm gonna download WordPress and be done in 5 minutes. So 5 minutes versus 6 years, you pick. And one's open source and free. I haven't heard of too many open source degrees. So that's my take on it. It was definitely a struggle starting out, but ultimately, it's your decision. It's really up to you. Are you going to fail or are you going to prosper? And with the learning resources, YouTube and Udemy and Free Codecamp and Khan Academy, and there's just a plethora of different resources out there. There's no excuse not to learn something. It only takes an hour a day, 2 hours a day. If you're ambitious, 36 hours straight. But, it's up to you.
I don't think I've ever been held back because I don't have a computer science degree. The thing that has held me back is me reading it on the job application that a computer science degree is required. So I'm immediately putting that marker down and saying, nope, I don't have that background. I can't do that, or I shouldn't do that, or I better stop and come up with a year plan of how I master. That job will be gone by then. So I think I overthink not having a computer science degree. One of the first things you meet me, if you talk to me or you're interviewing me, I'll tell you, yes, I code, but I'm not the smartest coder in the world, on the team. And that's also selling myself short because, people on the team say, no, you're awesome, you're great, you can do so much better than all these other people. And the thing that has helped me get past that insecurity of not having the degree is being part of a community. I started I got really involved in XP development, love XP development, love everything about it, and started attending things called code retreats, where we would test drive the same problem over and over and over again. And people would say, wow, you're really good at this, and they'd start recommending me for jobs in different places. And it was me putting myself out there and being willing to do those things and being willing to work on my craft and meeting people that people started recommending me. And that's probably about the way that I get to meet the most people that I want to be employed with is through recommendations. So by doing that, you don't need a degree.
And I think something that you and I talked about is, and this is something that I probably interview at least 3 people every day in terms of phone screens, and then we've got a team over here that kind of does more of a technical screen. And we've seen trends where, typically speaking, whenever we're surprised about, there'll be times where I say, not sure, probably worth trying, or this one's probably, there's been a trend that we've seen, and I think you told me about it too, where it's usually the men that are like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. That's not a problem. And then there's a trend of women who will say, well, not really, I kind of do. And to your point of selling yourself short, I think there's some kind of sort of implicit gender bias that gets projected there. And for our standpoint, we've kind of noticed this as a trend, and it's easy for us as a small company to kind of course correct how we phrase our screening questions, how we phrase our interviews. But it's something interesting that I've noted, and then speaking with Amy just before this, she mentioned, she pointed out an article to me where there's a study that showed that's pretty validated as well.
Yeah, there's a study that was done at Harvard Business Review in 2014 that says a man will read a job interview, and if they don't meet it all, 60% of the time they'll apply for it. A woman will do it and won't do it unless almost 100% is met. So it's important to get over that bias and say, put myself out there and do that, and because I can meet those things.
I want to add to
that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think if you're just now getting started in software, I think it's a perfect time right now, right? Because we're in the information age. There's crazy stuff happening. There's new technologies, and there's a shortage of really good developers. There's a shortage of really good software engineers and architects. So with that being said, you don't have to jump into a job knowing everything. I feel like nowadays employers are more patient than ever. I mean, I spend about maybe 4 hours a day like reading documentation and APIs and just doing things like that. And I know that once we have a down moment at work, that the other people that are maybe junior devs or on my team or whatever, they're watching React videos, they're learning tutorials on certain things, and this is on employer dime. So I feel like nowadays employers are more than willing to invest in the people that they hire. I think when I first started, that wasn't necessarily the case. You kind of needed to know everything, hence why I got certification. So the ecosystem right now is very healthy. It's very good for like growth-oriented people.
Cool, thank you. Were there any other parting thoughts from any of the panelists before we go to Q&A?
As part of my job over the last decade or so, I've been a VP of engineering. So I spend, like a lot of my time interviewing, recruiting, sourcing, hiring. And I've probably hired like 600 people over the last decade, which means I've probably done something crazy like 3,000 interviews or something like that. And always I'm looking, not at first, right? But now I'm looking for two key things, which some of you will already know, which is like smart gets things done. So no part of that is like went to Harvard. Now if you went to Harvard, you're probably smart, but not necessarily. You might just be rich. And gets things done is like actually really, really important. I would usually bias towards gets things done over smart. Because smarts can actually improve. It's not just DNA. Like there's a compounding effect of intelligence that I've noticed over the years. Like taking a person and putting them with really smart people, like literally makes that person smarter. But getting things done, which is like execution and just a sense of urgency about work, is something that's kind of harder to learn and harder to teach. And I think that what my co-panelists have been elaborating upon is like a method for learning how to get things done through like self-discovery or self-learning.
I want to add to that. It's on? Okay. I think Gavin brought up a really good point about just basically, this is something that I definitely take to heart. You don't have to take to heart. I don't care if you take it to heart. But if you're the smartest person in the room, it's time to change rooms, right? So, you put someone that's maybe at this level of competency with someone that's at this level of competency, they're gonna grow. They're gonna grow because they're gonna be embarrassed, they're gonna, they're feeling enraged, they're gonna go study, they're gonna do something. But if you're the smartest person in the room, you're not growing. It's time to change rooms. And so this circles back to being comfortable. If you understand that I am the head honcho here, but having, self-awareness of ignorance, that there's more out there, then you're not growing. So, you do a little bit of introspective, self-research and just understand that you shouldn't be the smartest person in the room. And, and if you are, just get some really smart friends.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating. Thanks for coming from our way. Thanks for sticking around.